words can be confusing at times. Take, for example, sanction could mean official approval or a penalty. Today, in the Democrats' camp, President Biden has said that he's confident that he should be able to secure an hostage deal in Israel by the 20th. Of course, he's trying to salvage whatever he can from his presidency after taking the crown from President Carter, who died a happy man. By doing this, Biden is sanctioning Hamas's survival. The CIA director, William Burns, says that the talks are serious. He's the guy in charge of talking to the terrorists, really. The only thing that he also said today, something that really annoyed me, is that it's about hostages held in hellish condition, he said. And it's about the Gazan civilians who are also in hellish condition. I mean, these people must be either stupid or evil, or both, because he ignores the fact that the hostages are in hellish condition because the poor Gazan civilians are actually holding them. It's the result of their actions that means that the hostages are there in the first place. But, let's ignore this, shall we? The Republicans, on the other hand, in the House of Representatives today, voted to sanction, in punishing, any ICC office official, including the alleged sexual predator, Karim Khan, if they try to arrest, investigate, detain, or prosecute protected person of the United States and its allies, namely Netanyahu and Gallant.
So is this a sign of mixed messages, or is it an indication of a change in approach as we move from one administration to the next? This is what we're going to be looking at today. Welcome to the reality show. And I'm joined by Mark Pellegrino and by Daniel. Now, Mark, you often end these shows by citing Ayn Rand's entreaty to check your premises. So let's start by looking at the hostages and the question, which I know you've answered many times, but let's do it one more time for those who really can't get it. What is wrong with the premise that the only way to save innocent Israeli hostages is to negotiate with terrorists?
Yeah, I mean, it gives the terrorists a kind of legitimacy that they don't deserve. They've committed a terrible crime against humanity, against the individuals, and the only responsibility of those attempting to get the hostages back is to get them back by force. You can't give the hostage takers some form of diplomatic legitimacy that they've committed crimes which aren't negotiable, and they've thrown aside due process, they've thrown aside rights, and so have none of their own to fall back on. So they have no claims to set conditions for anything. It is the defenders who set the conditions. It's the defenders who have the right to demand the hostages back or use extreme physical force against the hostage takers to retrieve the hostages. It is a non-negotiable concept here. So the negotiation gives them some form of moral weight that they don't actually have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, what do you think on this point now on the hostages? Now, I just to add to this, we can quote the same person, the CIA director, William Burns, saying that this is not just an abstraction. These are human beings. He's talking about the hostages here. Now, the abstraction surely is justice, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what it. Talking about principles, there is the idea of the trader principle. Basically, when you engage in a civilized context, when you engage with someone, it should be based on values. It should be based on, if we trade, you get something from me and I get something from me. And unless we both agree, unless we both gain value, then such a thing cannot happen. And they almost look at this as like an example of trader principle. Well, they have the hostages, and we have the terrorists that have committed October 7th. So, we can exchange them. We can both sort of gain value. And it is almost like, call it a traitor principle more like. I'm really good with words today. Yeah, I mean, it's truly, I mean, despicable. It's truly, as you mentioned, sort of, yeah, I mean, it's sad the fact that there are still hostages. Some of them are Americans, so also there is that aspect. It's terrible that it happened, but when it comes to fighting a war, when it comes to really, yeah, fighting injustice, fighting for civilization, fighting for Western values, you cannot negotiate with evil. I mean, don't negotiate with terrorists. That's like, watch any sort of like action movie. It's like the first thing you'll hear. And the fact that yeah, I guess it fits that sort of idea, sort of don't negotiate with terrorists, is sort of viewed as fiction. This is just we can just put it in art, but we cannot apply it in reality. The fact is that every single time we negotiate, and then it makes Hamas stronger. It allows Hamas to continue existing. I mean, we don't even. This is not even abstract principle. Just go look at the reality. Look at all the past negotiations, all the past ceasefires that have happened. And can you give me one example when sort of negotiating with terrorists we came out with, oh, they actually de-radicalized. They actually, because we gave them, again, who are we giving them back? It's not like we're giving them scientists and sort of like free marketeers. We're giving them back more terrorists, and sort of the idea that, just give them back terrorists and then, they'll be happy. I mean, the whole reason why they have the hostages was so they can get back the terrorists that have committed October 7th, so they can continue fighting into the future. So, look at the incentives, look at what is their goal, and sort of, trying to think of it as, somehow this will work out into the future is, as we've said when we discussed the Lex Friedman podcast, he says is the naivete. It's not naivete, and if it is, these people shouldn't be like the strongest, holding the strongest positions in the strongest country ever. You shouldn't have any naivete. You should know what's going on, and they know what's going on, and they are actively committing evil. They are compromising with evil.
Yeah, and to be honest, given that we are in the dying days of the Biden administration, however alive that ever was, this feels like a cynical attempt from a failed president to try and score points, just to show that the plan they proposed in the summer last year, it's actually not dead. So he's done something good. But the problem, the definition of these people, good, is altruistic good, is appeasing the other side. How can you possibly come to negotiation, sit at the table with the people who are actually holding the hostages, the people who organized the action which resulted in the death of over 1,000 people and the capture of 250 people? I mean, just assumption that you can sit down at a table with this kind of people is just a failed assumption.
And
Yeah, if I can just add one more thing, because I remember we mentioned the hellish conditions, or I'm not sure if it was the CIA or who said that the hellish conditions of both the hostages and the Palestinians. I mean, that sort of equivalence is really ridiculous. I mean, imagine, just think about the pain of Mark Pellegrino's face and my fist. They are both hurting. They both sort of are damaged because some action happened. I mean, the idea that these and of course the implication is that I punch him, which I would never do because I would probably get punched back because he is not sort of Israeli prime minister who doesn't really fight back, or he's not the Western leaders who don't really fight back. The fact that as you have said, that these things are viewed as equivalent, that the suffering of the hostages who didn't commit anything, who are absolutely innocent, even in the most extreme context, because some of them were actual children who don't even have moral agency to commit any evil, and sort of like equating sort of these hostages with people who have celebrated on October 7th, people who have joined on October 7th, people who continue either supporting Hamas or not resisting Hamas, not trying to stand up against Hamas, even despite the fact that Hamas has been getting weaker and weaker, and actually even holding the hostages in some cases of the Palestinian hostages. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that, like, this equivocation, again, this is not naivete, it's evil.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that they're not necessarily sitting immediately opposite the table from Hamas, but have some sort of cushion of a set of mediators and a plate of baklava and croissant to accompany the meetings regularly, and then report back and do formal meetings like that. It doesn't hide the fact that they're still negotiating with terrorists ultimately. And Mark, when you hear that Hamas have said, we don't know where the hostages are, but we will find out if Israel agrees to our terms. I mean, how can
look, the idea that these people have the audacity to claim that they can set terms just frosts me. No, when you are the initiator of force, you do not set terms anymore. The defender sets the terms. And as far as I'm concerned, the terms should be unconditional surrender. That's it. Nothing beyond that. It's unconditional surrender and the turning over of any remaining Hamas people to the authorities to be tried and, in my view, publicly executed for their crimes against humanity, and returning the hostages. There is no negotiation. There cannot be a negotiation with a criminal organization. They are inherently dishonest. They are inherently violent. The only thing you can do with them, and they have set this situation up. Quite aside from the fact that they're a criminal organization, they've claimed we're not going to stop until we get what we want. Well, they're very clear about what they want, which is the annihilation of Jews. You can't compromise with those people. You can't negotiate with those people. The only thing you can do is eliminate them. That's it. And that's their fault, not yours, for protecting yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're talking about 98 hostages by this point or thereabouts. And it's thought by the Israeli authorities that about half of them are probably dead at this point. And I'm going to quote this shit, even though it is shit, quite frankly. But this three-phase deal, this idea that in the first phase, a third of them would be released, those being of non-military age. And then in the second deal, the military age people would be released. And in the third phase, the dead hostages, the bodies of hostages, would be released. But of course, all of that is negotiable at a bunch of stages, according to the people who believe in this nonsense. So, Daniel, I mean, how can we unpiece this? How can we even entertain this idea of a three-phase deal when the leader of the free world has set it up as his sort of flagship solution to trying to end the crisis in the Middle East?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always goes to the fundamentals, and someone in the chat brings it up nicely, so I'll just mention it. Why are the Western powers not helping Israel create a plan to manage Gaza and the West Bank through into the future? And the fact is, what would need to happen for any sort of, even for these deals, what would need to happen is acknowledgement of reality, is acknowledging that Palestinians are the problem. The Palestinian ideas, the sort of the culture is the problem. But that's not what's happening. The way this is viewed is Hamas. I think one of the IDF former generals put it nicely in the recent episode I did with James. He said, we view them as ISIS, as basically a terrorist organization that have imposed themselves on a population. That population doesn't want it, and we need to sort of fight it and sort of liberate those people. And this is not what's happening here. The fact is that Palestinians have elected Hamas, and now you might say that happened a long time ago, and many people who are alive today were not alive when it happened. But the fact is, there were no demands for a new election since. There were no demands to have someone else in charge. There were no protests against what Hamas is doing. There is no, right now, Slovakia is a different country, but if we have protests going on right now, and have been pretty much since the last election, because when people really do disagree with what's going on, and go anywhere else around the world, talk about the BLM protests, and now again you might disagree with protests going on around the world, but the fact is, when people are not okay with what's happening, they will protest. They will try to stand up. Go to Iran, go to China. It happens even in more authoritarian nations. The fact is that in Gaza there is nothing. There is really nothing. And sort of now going back to the hostage deal or to some future for Gaza. The fact is that the West doesn't acknowledge that. We still view Hamas as sort of holding Palestinians as the hostages, and so that's why they say Gazans are also suffering, because we view them as separate. That's why we try to negotiate for a ceasefire, because we want to stop Palestinian suffering, because we see them as different from Hamas. And that's why there is no negotiation that's possible, because again, when you have wrong premises, you can try to act on wrong premises and try to put it into the world, sort of similar how when a crisis happens, you have the socialists trying to deal with it with more governmental control, with more state ownership of industries or whatever else, and then it fails again because it goes against reality. So, but because their ideas haven't changed, they didn't check their premises, they didn't change it in a way, they try to impose more. And it's similar way here. We try to negotiate with terrorists because we believe Palestinians are different from Hamas. We try to have a ceasefire because we hope that once the war stops, then they won't want to fight again. And we don't check our premises. We don't try to look back and, oh, it didn't work last time. What's going on? Why did this go against the ideas we held? No, it's just we just have to try harder.
Yeah, and as Marx mentioned earlier on, these people do not want peace with Israel. From the very first day that Israel was declared a free, independent country, they attacked it. They attacked it over and over again. They never accepted the proposal on the table of two-state solution because they do not want a two-state solution. But this particular deal, it really, really rattles me, because the only reason why Hamas now is negotiating is they've been pushing back a deal for months now. But the only reason why they're doing it, because they're a bunch of cowards. Because the moment that the president of the United States, the president-elect of the United States, says, if you don't return the hostages, there's going to be hell to pay, they immediately buckled. These people are such cowards. They exploit our weakness to such an extent that as soon as we show them, well, actually, we're not afraid of you, you punks, they just back down. And that's exactly what they're doing now. If we stood up to them from the very beginning, they wouldn't be a problem at all. Look at the Houthis. They should have been flattened the first time they even threw a piece of firework out of their own area. So you actually show the kind of moral cowardice that these people represent.
And if you contrast that with the CIA director, William Burns, who's, of course, in his last few days in the job, no doubt.
Hopefully.
Then he said this, and I'd like to come to you, Mark, with this one. He said, perfect is rarely on the menu in the Middle East. It is time to make a deal. Now, why is the Middle East different from everywhere else?
Yeah, well, it seems to be a region that defies all of the pragmatists' capacities to solve the problem, mostly because they have no moral premises and they're pragmatists, so they have no principles. So it's difficult for them to grasp the situation. So they see everything as a discrete series of concretes. They don't see it. They don't see it as we do, as whole context. And so it makes it rather impossible for them to grab the bull by the horns and actually take control of the situation. I feel like the Middle East is actually one of the easiest problems to solve if you have a morally principled person in office. It's not pretty, it's not going to look nice, but it will certainly end conflict forever if you approach Hamas as the criminal organization they are, the Palestinians as the toxic society that it is, and work accordingly. without giving them the legitimacy that they have not earned. The only way they can earn legitimacy in negotiation is by total and absolute unconditional surrender and returning the hostages that they've stolen. That's it. That is the objective way that they say we are now embracing civilization. We're giving up our toxic ideology, our religious fanaticism. We're ready to step into the secular world and conform to democratic norms. That's the only thing that needs to happen now. Anything beyond that is negotiating with criminals, enabling them and encouraging them to continue to do what they've done, which is what they say they are going to do anyway. It's not like they've been very discreet about, or clever about what they're doing. They're not negotiating and claiming that they're not going to use these tactics to eventually cause damage in the future. They've actually outright said, we're going to do this again and again and again and again. Well, if they've said that, they have lost their right to exist. Do people understand the conditional nature of rights like this? They've lost their right to exist. If you're trying to kill me, I don't care about your right to life anymore. You can't have rights without life. And this is what that culture is shooting for, a world without life, a death cult. And until that death cult is completely exterminated, we're never going to have peace.
Yeah, and certainly you don't sit at a table with somebody who's holding a gun. I mean that's just idiotic in the first place, isn't it?
Let's thank our super chatters. We've got one from Gail. Thank you very much, Gail. Appreciate it. And one from Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. Same to you. Absolutely. And Daniel, let me come to you. Now, obviously, we are mere days away from Trump taking office. And I know we don't necessarily see completely eye to eye on the two parties necessarily, but how do you see the attitude to the hostages, to dealing, changing or not changing? The fact that, for example, obviously the Trump administration are also working behind the scenes with the Biden administration here, so they're not entirely two separate entities. So what do you see? Is this deadline of the 20th of January significant or irrelevant when it comes to how we're likely to see the approach as we go over the next week or so?
So as you said, especially with sort of yeah, basically, I think it was like 3 months since the election and until now when Trump will officially take office. So there have, of course, presidents do cooperate with each other to basically make the transition as smooth as possible or try to make the transition. So I think they were probably in touch. I think we've even heard that, I think it was Blinken saying that even if this deal doesn't go through before January 20th, that he believes it will continue going further. And I think it will. I don't think much will change when it comes to negotiations themselves. I think what will be different is the fact that Donald Trump is now commander-in-chief. Donald Trump is the guy in charge now, which I think will have much bigger impact on the threat of what Donald Trump might do if something happens. Again, I think when the first time this possibility came up, there's technically nothing stopping Trump to go with ships into Gaza and going on a land invasion in Gaza. There are Americans being held in Gaza. They have absolutely every, I don't like to talk about countries' rights, but they absolutely can go in. So I think the pressure on Hamas on the title, on the thumbnail, I put the art of not making a deal, which is of course play on the Donald Trump's book. And the fact is, I think deal will be much more possible with Trump in power, both sort of from the idea of sort of basically this having ability to pressure Hamas more, not putting pressure on Israel, as the Biden administration has been doing, as a lot of the pressure has been coming on Israel to basically have softer terms, have softer demands. Then the question is if the deal will be more likely to be put through, and I'm wondering about that. Obviously for us, I think it would be better if the deal doesn't go through, because unless it changes a lot with Trump in office, but even then there will be some ceasefire, however deal looks like. I think there will be some ceasefire, and I think Israel simply cannot afford any stopping in fighting. So that will be sort of my biggest question is, yeah, if this deal goes through, and how much will the actual demands actually change?
Yeah, and I actually have a few questions that I'm wondering. Are the Democrats just trying to achieve peace to look good? Let's not forget that Biden was telling Netanyahu to take the win after Iran threw hundreds of ballistic missiles at Israel. I mean, that's going beyond, isn't it? But they must be aware that by asking for peace now, they're asking for Hamas to have a reprieve, to have time to hide away, recover, and whatever, redo the supplies, dig more tunnels or whatever. And at the same time, I wonder whether they want to deprive Trump of the opportunity to actually join Netanyahu and flatten Hamas once and for all. So, Mark, do you think this is a cynical thing that the Democrats are taking advantage of by at the same time helping Hamas and stopping Trump from making a good point by doing something again like he destroyed ISIS when he came in the first time? Do you think that the Democrats are cynically trying to win one over onto the Republicans?
Oh, yeah. I do think the Democrats are trying to do everything in their power to hobble the president before he comes in. I think they are the party of cynicism. It's the way they operate. Of course, I don't think there should be any deal with these bad guys. The only deal should be brokered after they completely and totally surrender. We have had This is essentially the longest war in history. It's been over 75 years of constant, more or less constant warfare, and it always goes the same way. They attack, they do terrible things. Israel either sits on a retaliation for a time, then retaliates. The UN steps in against them, brokers a ceasefire, and there's a ceasefire until the next war, until the next war, until the next war. They have been doing this since the 30s. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Well, we already know what these endless ceasefires amount to. They amount to a retrenchment on the part of the Arabs, the Arab nationalists and Islamofascists, and then they attack again. They've openly said they're going to do it again. So there's no way they should be allowed to reform and rebuild. They don't build anything except military infrastructure and a terror state. It's not like they're out there trying to create a legitimate state that exchanges values with us. That's what Israel has been trying to do with them since the mid 90s. They've been trying to create enterprise zones and trying to create vigorous trade between Arabs and Israelis, trying to bring them into the international world, and the Palestinians have consistently refused. They want to be backwards. They want to be fanatics. They identify with this grievance, and without that grievance, I don't think they feel like they're anything. So they need to be completely and totally defeated. There can't be the negotiating table should be burned on a pyre somewhere, and it should be burned symbolically so that the Palestinians realize there's no turning back now. You've made this about us, or you or us. It's going to be us. Now, this is serious. So take your martyrdom seriously, because it's going to happen. And of course, the world will scream about how brutal and awful Israel is, but without acknowledging the context that it's the Palestinians that have made it us or them. Just look at all the man in the street interviews. I haven't seen one Palestinian on the street say that they want to live in peaceful coexistence with Jews. Not one in any of these men on the street interviews. But dozens upon dozens of Israelis are ready to do lots of things, and they've demonstrated this on a national scale to get peace with their fellow Arabs. They've given up land for peace. They've demilitarized zones for peace. They've opened enterprise zones and started programs with the Palestinians in an attempt to help them economically. They don't want to be in Gaza and the West Bank. There's some fanatics who do, some messianic fanatics, but for the most part, it's a terrible drain, a psychological drain, a spiritual drain, and a material drain on them to occupy these territories. And they'd rather have them gone. They'd rather have them run independently by the Palestinian people who have demonstrated for the last 50 years that they're incapable of doing that.
Yeah. And of course, the Palestinian concept itself depends on war, because without a war with Israel, there would just be Arabs living in the area, wouldn't they? They need the war in order to make up the fake identity that it's a political ruse in order to have an enemy for Israel. So
Absolutely.
Can I thank Alexei for super chat? Thank you very much, Alexei, who says, anything wrong with the strategy of making a deal, freeing the hostages, and then giving them hell? Absolutely nothing wrong with it. I think you could even announce it in advance if you wanted to. But yeah, and absolutely, there's no problem with tricking evil people like Hamas and those who are holding the hostages.
the only problem that Hamas wants some terrorists in exchange for innocent people. That's a kind of human trait that these kind of animals are going down the route of.
Yeah. But at least during this phase, we're still seeing strikes in North and Central Gaza at the moment in the past day or so. So, you know, they're still fighting the war properly while still entertaining this option that, you know, none of us are in favor of. Now, it's not
I have a different mind. I think they deserve nothing, should get nothing except hot metal and lots of destruction. I don't think there should be aid that is allowed to go in there. They've made their bed. It's time to sleep on it and to be very, very uncomfortable, to know that they are responsible for where they are. Of course, the world is one giant enabler. They're like an enabler to a drug addicted kid. They just keep buying them drugs and placating them and trying to tell them everything's okay, when that's precisely the opposite of what the Palestinian people need. They are imbued with this toxic ideology, and they need to know that that ideology will end in their death and their destruction, their total impoverishment, and their unhappiness. And if they want to be happy, individuated, joyful, they want to live in peace, they better stop what they're doing right now and surrender or meet their maker.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we focus on the negative side, but let's have a look at the positive side and the illegitimate.
Can I not comment on this?
Yeah, you can if you're quick, for sure.
Yeah, I'll just mention a few things. So first of all, because we talked about the hostages and sort of what's the wrong with just getting the deal and then sort of fighting them further. So first, Netanyahu has said that even if deals goes through, he will continue fighting afterwards, or if the deal is broken. So we at least have that guarantee. One problem with that, if Israel does indeed get all the hostages back, the pressure will be much bigger on Israel, because people will say, well, you have the hostages, why are you keep fighting? Now, this is not as to say that Israel should not get the hostages back to have like a leverage on the international community. From the start, it should have been said that while getting the hostages back would be great and is a good strategic goal, the main goal should be de-radicalization of the Palestinian population, which would require getting rid of Hamas and occupying Gaza for the foreseeable future. Then when it comes to Biden's sort of last acts, or sort of what it says, well, sort of on, let's say, the sort of election grounds, we'll have a few, I believe, special elections, because few of the senators and congressmen are going into Trump administration, so their seats are not filled. So we'll have few elections. I'm not sure if like the races are close, and if something like this, you know, if let's say Biden does something and it's perceived really well, if it really transfers into those races. So I'm not sure, and you know, the next election will be in 2 years. So even if Biden like saves the world now, people will forget it in 2 years. Or if Biden destroys the world, people will forget it in 2 years. Like sort of the election thinking back is pretty small or pretty short. But when it comes to sort of the post-election shenanigans, I think that's the biggest part. If you think back of what Obama did I think in December 2016, so before Trump came into office, he pursued a really strong anti-Israeli sort of policies. I believe he condemned the settlers, and he also didn't veto in the UN resolution against the settlers. So I think something like that might be closer to what Biden is doing. Basically, not necessarily. It's basically something all presidents do, and it's kind of unfortunate. It's basically you go really far in one direction just so the president coming in that has a different view on this will first have to deal with this what you've done before he can go like move further in that direction. And it's really unfortunate artifact of the fact that president loses an election and then there's like 3 months he can still have power before like going into office.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's move to the positive side, because the good news is that they're passing through the House of Representatives has been the first stage of the fantastically named the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act, which sounds like an episode of one of these shows. It certainly fits in with a lot of the attitude that we've had to the ICC. So Mark, what do you think of this bill that's been passed in the first stage, the House of Representatives, in terms of criticizing the ICC and declaring that they would, all of this, any effort to investigate, arrest, detain, or prosecute a potential person of the potential protector of the US or its allies would be met with sanctions, the other kind of sanctions. This is a good sign, surely.
It is a good sign. Now let's hope it passes the Senate.
Any chance? Do you think it'd be filibustered into oblivion?
The Republicans are so fickle. Even when they have a majority, it's unclear if they will win anything. They haven't done much with their unanimous power in the past. I would hope that they would have the balls to pass it now, because the ICC is a totally corrupt institution and they need to be put in their place. They need to feel the fear of God.
Why does America seem to be able to see the ICC for what it is when so much of Europe, for example, doesn't?
I think America is unique. It's exceptional. It's the only country on the face of the earth that recognizes egoism and individualism as moral ideals, even if it's only implicit more now than explicit. Our idea of sovereignty is very, very different from that of the European world, and our framework for ethics and what is good and what isn't is very different from the rest of the world. Unfortunately, our youth have been educated by European adjacent folks who hold values that are very alien to us, and that's what we see when we see protests, pro-Palestinian protests, is that alien collectivist ideology that's permeating the youth. So I think that's why we're different. That's why we see things differently, and that's good. Even if we stand alone, we're alone, but we're right.
Yeah. Mark, I know you have to shoot off soon, so where can people find you, and have you got anything else you want to add?
Yes, they can find me at Mark R. Pellegrino on Twitter. They can also see on my profile the web page for the American Capitalist Party. It's called AmericanCapitalistParty.org. Go in there, sign up, be a member. We produce articles now, 2 or 3 articles a week for people to read, comment on. I'm interested in your comments on our perspective. I'm writing a number of them. So I'd be interested in your comments. But become a member. We're going to be at LibertyCon in Washington, D.C. from the February 6th to February 9th. I'll be speaking on a panel there and networking with some folks up in the Liberty movement to try to give the Capitalist Party a lot more cachet. And I know you guys are from a different country, so can't technically become members of the American Capitalist Party, but certainly you can lend your moral support, become a part of the digital capitalist army. You could just look on my on my Twitter site for the Digital Capitalist Army. Become a part of it. Get in the conversation. Let's expose the bad guys, the Robert Reiches of the world, the super big accounts out there that give anti-capitalist messaging. They need to be fought. They need to be resisted. They need counter messaging on their platforms, and that's what the Capitalist Army is supposed to do. So. That's what I'm doing right now, in addition to working as an actor in a very politically incorrect fashion. So wish me luck.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Daniel, when it comes to this bill, a lot of the criticism that I hear said against it, and of course it's lazy criticism and it's wrong, but let's look at it anyway, is the argument that the ICC is sanctioning people like Putin, and therefore you delegitimize the court and those sanctions of Putin if you create an act like this and get it all the way through US Congress. What do you think to that score?
Well, first let me just mention one more on the when can we expect this to pass through? Because again, in the Senate, Republicans only have 51 people because, as I mentioned, two have left. So there are two vacancies. So that's the tightest possible majority. Not to mention, even if it somehow goes through the Senate, you still have Biden as the president, who will most likely not sign it. So we'll have to wait at the very least until January 20th for Trump to get into office, both for if there is just 50 people, so J.D. Vance can break the tie vote, as well as, of course, Trump to pass it into law. Yeah, when it comes to, I mean, in a sense, it is right. This is delegitimizing ICC. This is delegitimizing the case that goes after Putin, after every single dictatorship, every single dictator or every single war criminal, not hate criminal, war criminal that has been sort of has a warrant against him by the ICC. But who started it? I mean, this was started by ICC by going after Netanyahu, by going after Yoav Galan. The fact is that now, and people are calling for ICC to go after. I'm not sure if they ever said after Biden or Kamala Harris, but I know they've said. Yeah, I think they. I've heard about, for example, people involved with Iraq war. Was it Tony Blair in the UK? I'm trying to remember. As well as George W. Bush. Yeah, I mean, once it gets that, yeah, there is no legitimacy, and there never really was that much legitimacy, because again, there is no there is no enforcing mechanism. There is no way of like directly going after these people. The only sort of agreement is that, if Putin goes into European country, if it goes or like any country that is part of the Rome Statute, that if that happens, then they will get arrested. And while that can sort of work, the fact is that you have a bunch of different countries sort of being signed on into this, and it doesn't really work. So I think now it was since they decided to go after Netanyahu, I think it was sort of revealed that what these organizations were like from the start. They never really were able. I mean, the fact is, this is sort of part of the UN, and we had Marco and Richard losing us, or we lost them. We have the organizations, or sort of organization like the UN. Again, UN includes Russia, China, Iran, and it includes the Palestinian territories. It includes every single sort of nation or wannabe nation in the world. And all of those sort of technically have to agree when it comes to picking the prosecutor for the ICC, when it comes to, basically picking the people at these bodies. And that sort of reminds me of, I've been talking about it, but someone earlier in the chat mentioned ICC is a global organization. there should be no bias, or sort of they just mentioned no bias in the quotation marks. And the fact is that the idea of bias, and I think the people use it, is sort of an anti-concept. I think would probably be closer to it. Basically, the idea for anti-concept is you're trying to put two or many different ideas into one concept that don't actually relate to each other. So or sort of, I guess it would be closer to a package deal. Basically, you're trying to put many different concepts into one, but it doesn't really work. And when people say bias, or sort of that the ICC shouldn't be biased, what they actually mean is it shouldn't be Western, it shouldn't be pro liberty, it shouldn't be civilized. Basically, that's what you're saying by arguing that it shouldn't have a bias. You are saying it should treat Russia, China, the Palestinian territories. We have Marco and Richard back, so I'll just make the point again, just so they are caught on. I was talking about someone saying that ICC shouldn't be biased, and the fact is, bias, as people are using, is really a package deal, because what they're really trying to say is that ICC shouldn't have any standards. It shouldn't view Russia, China, and United States or the UK as any different. Basically, they are the same sort of thing. There is no and I think we lost them again. There is no requirement for individual rights. There is no requirement for being pro-freedom. There is really no demands for anything good. So by saying no bias, you actually mean, it should view Netanyahu the same way as Mohammed Deif or whoever the ICC decided to go after also.
Yeah, I was actually going to say earlier on before we crashed, sorry about that. Do we really need the ICC to tell us that Putin is a dictator? Do we need the ICC to tell us that Xi Jinping is the dictator we shouldn't deal with? But, of course, here in Britain today, our chancellor went to China just to beg a few quid off them. It's like, and their excuse is always, well, it's the second largest economy. Well, go to the third one. Go to the first one. The first one is our biggest ally. Why are you going to cash in hat in hand to a dictator, a communist dictator? That's just ideological, isn't it? They can't even disguise the kind of stuff. They're trying to appease effectively the worst element of the international scene against the best element. Most politicians in the West will come out in favor of the dictators across the world rather than support places like Israel, which is the only democratic place in an era where democracy is just a dream mostly. But hey, this is the kind of world we're living in, aren't we?
And this bill that is gone through the first part of the House, as I say, gone through the first part of Congress, would allow the US to block and revoke visas, would allow them to prevent US property transactions for ICC staff and their associates. So, that is at least, a piece of justice, a piece of clear standing, at least on the issues. And some of the members of the House have laid it out quite clearly. I mean, Brian Mast was one such, for Florida Republican. He described the ICC as a kangaroo court and for going after the PM of the great ally Israel. But of course, you don't hear that from all of them. And there was one abstention from the Republican side. That was Thomas Massie of Kentucky. Now, he abstained by essentially making the argument that we should, the US shouldn't be meddling, shouldn't get involved in foreign countries' disputes.
This was one of the stupidest arguments I've ever heard. We shouldn't be involved in somebody else's dealing. It's like, really? I mean, can't you see the morality behind the point of supporting Israel? Honestly,
So what do you make of it overall, Daniel? Do you think this is a sign of a complete change, or because the Democrats wouldn't have even attempted this on their own? So can we give some praise for that? Do we think it's going to go all the way? I mean, as I said before, they could easily need to have to get 60 votes in the Senate in order to get it through. So if the Democrats decide to filibuster it and try and suppress it that way, I don't know whether all Democrats are going to stick to the party line, or whether there'll be a party line on it, or whether some will be convinced by the good arguments that we've been talking about here. What do you reckon?
First of all, I was only half listening before, not to this question, but before. When you're talking about Thomas Massey and he was the one, yeah. So he was the one Republican voting against this. There were also a bunch of Democrats, Democratic congressmen voting for it. So it passed through pretty easily. And yeah, Thomas Massey's comment, he always talks about how, the US should be less involved with other countries, or it shouldn't deal with other countries. And it's this sort of, I think it's very similar to the sort of libertarian, almost like anti or like isolationist view of the world. And it really is like really close to sort of moral equivocation. Like you don't view like things in the world differently. I mean, America is the strongest nation in the world. The idea that it shouldn't deal with foreign nations in any way. I mean, you can make a case for it in some aspects, but when it comes to legitimate things such as, warfare or sort of securing American citizens in the world, or securing America's allies, which again, the only allies America should have is the ones that help it fight. One are at least somewhat ideologically aligned. We shouldn't be allying ourselves with Saudi Arabia, for example, but we have some common agreement on, and we can work with them to sort of our greater enemies, or sort of our
Also,
actual enemies. Yeah.
as you mentioned earlier on, some of the hostages are American. So how can you say that's not something that matter to America or involves America? It's just mad.
Yeah, and earlier someone said something about Taiwan not being part of the UN and how it didn't really, hurt them. Actually, not being part of the UN usually helps you, and I don't know if this is. It reminds me. There is one game called New World, I believe. It's made by Amazon, actually, Amazon Game Studio. And I played it when I was in university. And there is one really nice line in that that you can find in one village, and it says something like, "I hate committees. Whenever two or three people are too dumb to make a decision, they make a committee." And I think this is sort of the way UN works. There is sort of this expectation of sort of like collective security. Like, as long as we all do the same thing, it might be wrong, but at least we are not stupid. We are not like stepping out of the ground. And I think that's why Taiwan was, despite being next to China, was one country that handled COVID the best. Is because it didn't listen to the WHO. It went, we cannot trust anything from China, we cannot trust anything from WHO, so we'll just deal with things on our own. And I think similarly, I bring example of Switzerland. It was, I think, one of the last nations to join the UN, and one of the last nations to, for example, also abandon the gold standard, which I've been looking into recently. And that's one of the reasons why Swiss franc is, I think, the strongest currency in the world right now. And so I think really sort of the collective stupidity you get from the UN, ignoring all the immoral aspects of acknowledging Soviet Union and Communist China as equal partners, ignoring the sort of the fact that every dictator, Taliban, can take over Afghanistan and they are part of the UN. I think this idea of collective, really like sort of hiding behind the collective, hiding behind, well, at least we are all doing it together, is really really bad when it comes to that. And I also, I think I went on a completely different tangent, and I don't even remember what your question was. Sorry.
Well, neither do I at this point, but it doesn't matter because it's still highly relevant to what we're talking about. And I was reminded by what you said then about committees, about how Ayn Rand frequently refers to the people on committees as, or a big chunk of them, as just ballast. And that's exactly what they are, aren't they? They're the cowards and the indifferent and the mindless who simply go along and vote with en masse, en bloc, and don't stick their heads above the parapet and don't express an actual view based on any form of morality. They're just flotsam and jetsam. So
one of the friends of Rourke, Lansing, wasn't it? That was condemning committees. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Fountainhead. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Dan. Where can people find more of your work?
You can find a lot of my old work on my YouTube channel. Damn, then I'll try to make some stuff there, but I always say that, so we'll see. But it's a YouTube channel. You'll be able to find it in the description.
And also check out the Briefly Objective sister channel to this, YouTube, for shorter content, shorts that you can embed in your media feeds or whatever. And check out the Ayn Rand Center UK Substack as well for articles and stuff like that.
Back here on this channel tomorrow for the Daily Objective, and we look forward to seeing you then. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.